in the heart of Silicon Valley, a place built on the promise of the future. Some stories become trapped in the past. This is one of them. It is the story of Maya Sharma, a mind so brilliant it was said she coded in her dreams, a rising star whose light was extinguished on the cusp of greatness. In 2008, she vanished from the very office that was her sanctuary, leaving behind only her ambition, her secrets, and a confounding silence. For 17 years, her disappearance became a ghost story whispered among tech veterans, a cautionary tale of a world that moves too fast to remember it's lost. But while the world forgot, a family's grief held steadfast, and a microscopic particle of dust, smaller than a grain of sand, waited patiently on an old keyboard in an evidence locker. It held a secret that technology, in its relentless march forward, would one day unlock, exposing a monster hiding not in the shadows, but in the blinding spotlight of celebrated genius. The night of October 14th, 2008, was thick with the strange electric tension that always settled over San Jose after sundown. The sweltering heat of the day had reluctantly given way to a cooler, restless breeze that rustled the palm trees lining the sprawling corporate campuses. Inside a low-slung, anonymous building in a North San Jose office park, the hum of server fans was the only sound that broke the stillness. This was the headquarters of Nexus Innovations, a startup that was little more than a dream. 2 desks and the relentless energy of its founder, Maya Sharma. At 29, Maya was the embodiment of the Valley's promise. The daughter of Indian immigrants, an engineer and a teacher, she had inherited her father's methodical mind and her mother's passionate spirit. She possessed a rare ability to see the architecture of the digital world not as lines of code, but as a living, breathing ecosystem. Her project, also called Nexus, was a revolutionary data synthesis algorithm poised to redefine artificial intelligence. It was her life's work, and she poured every waking hour into its creation. That evening, she was dressed in her typical uniform, dark jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and a worn gray hoodie. Around her neck hung a small silver elephant charm, a gift from her mother for good fortune. It was a tiny analog anchor in her deeply digital world. Her desk was an organized chaos of technical manuals, empty coffee mugs, and diagrams scrawled on a whiteboard. The centerpiece was her laptop, its screen glowing with the elegant, complex code that was her unique language. Beside it sat an ergonomic keyboard, its keys molded to the very hands that were building the future. At 10:47 p.m., Maya sent her last known communication. It was a short email to her parents, promising to wrap up soon and call them in the morning before her early investor meeting. She told them she was on the verge of a major breakthrough, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Her words were full of excitement and the casual affection of a daughter who knew she was loved. She then logged off her email, but the server log showed her system remained active, processing data for another 20 minutes. What happened in those 20 minutes would become the central, agonizing question for nearly 2 decades. The following morning, the office was still silent. Ben Carter, Maya's co-founder and the business-minded half of their duo, arrived at 8 a.m., expecting to find Maya already there, buzzing with the energy of her late-night progress. Instead, he found her desk just as she had left it. The laptop was closed. The ergonomic keyboard was slightly askew. Her purse was on the floor beside her chair, and her car keys were on the desk. Her silver sedan was still in its designated spot in the half-empty parking lot, but of Maya there was no sign. Ben's initial annoyance quickly curdled into a cold unease. Maya was obsessively punctual, especially on a day with a crucial meeting. He called her cell phone. It rang and rang, the sound echoing unnervingly in the quiet office, before switching to her bright, optimistic voicemail message. He left a message, then another. He paced the small office, his heart starting to thrum with a rhythm of dread. At 8:30 a.m., he made the call he never imagined he would have to make. He called Mr. and Mrs. Sharma. The Sharma's world tilted on its axis with that phone call. Their daughter, their brilliant, dependable Maya, was missing. Her father, Rohan, a man of quiet logic, tried to rationalize it. Perhaps she went for a walk to clear her head, and her phone died. Perhaps she was at a coffee shop, unable to hear his calls. But his wife, Anjali, felt a primal maternal terror grip her. She knew with a certainty that defied all logic that something was terribly wrong. Within the hour, they had called the San Jose Police Department, their voices tight with a panic they were desperately trying to contain. The initial police response was methodical and, to the desperate family, agonizingly slow. 2 uniformed officers arrived, their presence stark and official in the creative chaos of the startup office. They took statements from a distraught Ben Carter and the trembling Sharmas. They noted the lack of any obvious signs of a struggle. There was no forced entry, no overturned furniture, no blood. The scene was eerily pristine, as if Maya had simply evaporated into the conditioned air. Detectives from the Violent Crimes Unit arrived soon after. They cordoned off the office with yellow tape, turning Maya's creative space into a sterile crime scene. K9 units were brought in, their powerful noses tracing Maya's scent from her chair, around the office, and out into the parking lot. But there, by the driver's side door of her own car, the trail went dead. It was as if she had been lifted from the earth, leaving no trace behind. The forensics team began their painstaking work. They dusted every surface for fingerprints, scraped for fibers, and swabbed for DNA. They bagged Maya's purse, her keys, her hoodie, which was draped over her chair. They carefully packaged her laptop and the ergonomic keyboard. On a small side table a few feet from her desk, they found a disposable coffee cup, still holding a small amount of cold liquid. It seemed insignificant, perhaps left by a visitor days ago, but protocol was protocol. They bagged it and labeled it as evidence. Suspicion in cases like these almost always begins with those closest to the victim. But Maya had no romantic partner at the time. Her work was her all-consuming passion. Attention quickly turned to the cutthroat world of Silicon Valley itself. Had Maya's revolutionary algorithm attracted the wrong kind of attention? Was this a case of corporate espionage gone horribly wrong? The detective's focus, however, soon narrowed to a more tangible lead: a disgruntled employee. Daniel Reed was a talented but volatile programmer Maya had fired 6 weeks prior. The dispute had been ugly, centering on Reed's claim that he had co-developed a key component of the Nexus algorithm. Maya had disagreed, providing documentation that proved the work was solely hers. Reed had left under a cloud of threats, vowing that Maya would regret crossing him. He was the perfect suspect. He had motive, a history of aggression, and a plausible connection to the victim. The interrogation of Daniel Reed was intense. Detectives hammered him for hours in a small, windowless room. He was arrogant and resentful, openly stating that Maya got what she deserved for her hubris. But his story, for all his bluster, was solid. On the night of October 14th, he had been at a sports bar in Sunnyvale, drowning his sorrows. He had a credit card receipt time-stamped at 11:30 p.m., and a weary bartender vaguely remembered the angry man nursing beers at the end of the bar for several hours. His alibi was thin, but it was an alibi. The police were skeptical, but they had nothing to hold him on. The investigation broadened, chasing the shadow of corporate espionage. Detectives interviewed executives from rival tech firms, trying to find anyone who knew about the specifics of Maya's work. They encountered a wall of corporate lawyers and non-disclosure agreements. Whispers and rumors flew, but no concrete evidence emerged. The tech world was a place of fierce competition, but abduction and murder seemed a line too far, even for the most ruthless players. The physical evidence collected with such care yielded frustratingly little. The fingerprints in the office belonged to Maya, Ben, and a handful of delivery people and contractors, all of whom were quickly cleared. The CCTV camera in the building's lobby had malfunctioned that night, recording only a loop of the empty entrance hall. The DNA technology of 2008, while advanced for its time, was not sensitive enough to pull a usable profile from the trace amounts of skin cells left on the coffee cup. The evidence was there, but the tools to decipher it did not yet exist. Months turned into a year. The investigation had hit a dead end. Daniel Reed, though publicly scorned and unable to find work, was legally in the clear. The corporate espionage angle remained a tantalizing but unprovable theory. The active investigation slowed, then stalled, then stopped. Maya Sharma's case, once a headline story, was officially moved to the cold case files, a thick manila folder filled with dead ends and unanswered questions. For the San Jose Police Department, it was another unsolved mystery. For the Sharma family, it was the beginning of a life sentence. They refused to let Maya's memory be filed away. They vowed that they would be her voice, her advocates, her memory keepers. Rohan and Anjali, once private people, stepped into the harsh glare of the media. They gave countless interviews, their faces etched with a grief that never subsided, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. They established the Maya's Light Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship for young women pursuing careers in technology. It was their way of ensuring that the future Maya was building would not die with her. Every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, they held a candlelight vigil outside her old office building. In the early years, hundreds of people came, friends, colleagues, and strangers, moved by their tragedy. But time is a relentless current. As the years passed, the crowds at the vigils grew smaller. The media stopped calling. Silicon Valley, in its perpetual quest for the next big thing, moved on. New startups were born, new fortunes were made, and the story of the brilliant young woman who vanished became a footnote, a piece of local lore. For the Sharmas, however, time did not heal. It only deepened the wound, stretching their hope thin across a vast and empty expanse of 17 years. Their daughter was suspended in a terrible limbo, not alive, but not laid to rest. By 2025, the world Maya had been helping to create had fully arrived. Artificial intelligence was integrated into every facet of modern life, much of it built on principles she had been pioneering. In a quiet corner of the Santa Clara County Crime Lab, a new initiative was underway. A young, determined cold case detective named Isabella Rossi was using a grant to retest evidence from decades-old cases using technologies that were science fiction in 2008. Detective Rossi was a digital native who saw unsolved cases not as failures of the past, but as complex data problems waiting for the right analytic tool. When she pulled Maya Sharma's file, she was struck by the pristine nature of the crime scene and the sheer lack of resolution. She read through the old reports, the witness statements, and the frustratingly inconclusive forensic summaries. She felt a connection to Maya, another woman navigating the male-dominated world of logic and systems. Reopening the case meant reopening the wound for the Sharma family. When Rossi called them, their reaction was a painful mixture of hope and terror. For 17 years, they had lived with a dull, constant ache. The prospect of new information was like a jolt of electricity, threatening to awaken the acute agony of the early days. But they agreed without hesitation. Any chance, no matter how slim, was a chance they had to take. Rossi's approach was different from the original investigators. She wasn't just looking for a person, she was looking for a ghost in the machine, a digital or physical signature that had been missed. Her attention was drawn to two items from the evidence log, the ergonomic keyboard and the long-forgotten coffee cup. They were tangible objects from Maya's last known moments, and Rossi believed they still had a story to tell. She sent the coffee cup to a specialized forensics lab in Virginia that employed a new, incredibly sensitive DNA extraction process. It could build a profile from just a handful of degraded cells. Then she sent the keyboard to a different kind of lab, one affiliated with Stanford's Material Science Department. She wasn't looking for biological evidence on the keyboard, but for something else. A hunch. In her experience, everyone carries a trace of their world with them. A killer might have carried a trace of his into Maya's office. Weeks later, the first results came back. It was from the Material Science Lab. Using a scanning electron microscope and an X-ray spectrometer, they had analyzed the microscopic dust and particles lodged deep between the keys of Maya's keyboard. Most of it was mundane: skin cells, food crumbs, office dust. But they found one particle, almost invisible to the naked eye, that was completely unique. It was a minuscule metallic flake, an alloy of tungsten and gallium, with a crystalline structure they had never seen before. This was the kind of anomaly Rossi had been hoping for, a material fingerprint. Her team began a painstaking search, cross-referencing the alloy's composition with industrial and scientific databases. The search was global and yielded nothing. The alloy was not used in any commercial products. It was not documented in any public patents. It was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. But Rossi knew that such a specialized material had to come from somewhere. She expanded her search to include proprietary corporate research, a far more difficult and legally complex task. After weeks of navigating legal hurdles, she got a hit. The specific tungsten-gallium alloy was a highly experimental material used in the development of next-generation quantum computing chips. And it was proprietary to only one company in the world, Titan Dynamics, a global technology behemoth. The CEO of Titan Dynamics was a man celebrated as one of the founding fathers of the modern tech revolution, a visionary named Dr. Alex Thorne. The name struck a chord with Rossi. She went back to the original case file and found it buried deep in the supplementary reports. Dr. Alex Thorne had been briefly interviewed in 2008. He had been Maya's mentor at Stanford and had written her a glowing letter of recommendation for her first seed funding. He was considered a friend and a supporter, a powerful ally who was far above suspicion. The report also mentioned a minor patent dispute between Maya's startup and a subsidiary of Titan Dynamics, but it had been resolved amicably and was dismissed as a routine business matter. In 2008, it was a dead end. In 2025, it was a flashing red light. Alex Thorne was a pillar of Silicon Valley. He was a philanthropist, a frequent speaker at tech conferences, and a man whose public persona was one of calm, intellectual brilliance. The idea that he could be connected to a violent crime seemed preposterous, but the metallic dust was a direct physical link between his highly secure experimental research facility and the scene of Maya's disappearance. It was a thread, and Rossi was determined to pull it. Just as she began digging into Thorne's history, the second call came. It was from the DNA lab in Virginia. They had done it. Using the new amplification techniques, they had successfully extracted a partial but clear DNA profile from the saliva left on the rim of the 17-year-old coffee cup. It was a male profile. The ghost in the evidence locker now had a genetic signature. Rossi now had two powerful, independent lines of evidence pointing in the same improbable direction. The problem was connecting them. She needed Alex Thorne's DNA to compare with the profile from the cup, but asking a powerful, respected billionaire for a voluntary DNA sample was out of the question. It would tip him off, and if he was guilty, he would have the best lawyers in the world stonewalling the investigation. Rossi needed to get his DNA covertly. A covert surveillance team was assigned to Thorne. For 2 weeks, they followed him, a team of ghosts tracking a titan of industry. They watched him move between his sprawling Los Altos Hills mansion, his gleaming corporate headquarters, and the exclusive restaurants where he held his power lunches. Thorne was meticulous, private, and left almost no trace. He rarely ate in public, and when he did, he was surrounded by an entourage. The break came during a tech conference at the San Jose Convention Center. Thorne was the keynote speaker. The surveillance team was in the audience, in the catering staff, in the security detail. They watched as Thorne delivered a brilliant speech about the future of technology, earning a standing ovation. Afterwards, during a private reception, an undercover officer posing as a waiter offered him a bottle of water. Thorne took it, drank from it, and then set it down on a table before being pulled into a conversation. A few minutes later, another member of the team, clearing the table, discreetly pocketed the bottle. The water bottle was rushed to the county crime lab. The technicians worked through the night, swabbing the rim and running the sample. Detective Rossi waited, the hum of the lab's equipment a soundtrack to 17 years of waiting. At 4 a.m., the lab supervisor brought her the report. The DNA profile from the water bottle was a perfect, statistically irrefutable match to the male profile recovered from the coffee cup found at the crime scene in 2008. They had him. The ghost had a name. The arrest was executed just before dawn. A quiet, professional SWAT team descended on the gated mansion in Los Altos Hills. There was no dramatic standoff. They breached the doors with quiet efficiency and found Dr. Alex Thorne in his bedroom, sleeping in silk pajamas. His initial reaction was not fear, but indignant confusion, as if he were a king being bothered by a commoner. When he saw Detective Rossi standing behind the armored officers, and she told him he was under arrest for the murder of Maya Sharma, his face went pale. The mask of the visionary slipped, revealing something cold and hollow underneath. The news of his arrest sent a seismic shock through the tech world and beyond. The Sharma family was notified in a pre-dawn phone call from Rossi. Anjali Sharma dropped the phone, a single sharp cry escaping her lips. Rohan Sharma simply sat down, the weight of 17 years of uncertainty finally crashing down on him. The name Alex Thorne was a profound shock. He was the man who had championed their daughter, the man they had once admired. The betrayal was a new and dizzying layer of pain on top of their immeasurable grief. In the interrogation room, Alex Thorne was the picture of composure. Flanked by his high-priced lawyers, he denied everything. He claimed he hadn't seen Maya for months before her disappearance. He dismissed the patent dispute as trivial. He was calm, arrogant, and utterly convincing. Then Rossi laid out the evidence. She started with the coffee cup. She told him they had his DNA, placing him in Maya's office on the night she vanished. Thorne's lawyers scoffed, calling it circumstantial. He could have visited her at any time. Then Rossi played her trump card. She presented the analysis of the metallic dust. She explained what it was, where it came from, and that it could only have come from someone with direct access to his most secret research lab. She described how the microscopic flake had likely been carried out on the sole of his shoe or the cuff of his pants. A tiny, silent witness that had traveled from his world into hers and stayed there for 17 years. As she spoke, Thorne's composure finally fractured. A flicker of panic flashed in his eyes. He stopped talking, and his lawyers ended the interview. But the crack in his armor was all Rossi needed to see. Thorne's initial confession did not come from a place of remorse, but from a calculated attempt to control the narrative. In a later interview, he admitted he had been there that night. He maintained that he and Maya had argued, but insisted she was alive and well when he left. He claimed their argument was about her decision to leave his mentorship and strike out on her own. It was a lie, a self-serving story designed to paint him as a spurned mentor, not a killer. The prosecution, however, now had enough to piece together the real story. The trial of Dr. Alex Thorne was a media spectacle. It pitted the narrative of a beloved tech icon against the cold, hard facts of modern science. The prosecution, led by a tenacious deputy district attorney, built their case methodically. They started by painting a picture of Maya Sharma, not just as a victim, but as a brilliant creator on the verge of changing the world. The Sharmas testified, their quiet dignity and profound sorrow filling the courtroom with an unbearable weight. The core of the case was the forensic evidence. The prosecution brought in the material scientist who had identified the tungsten-gallium alloy. He explained to the jury how the particle was a material fingerprint, as unique and damning as a bloody knife. Then the DNA expert testified, explaining the statistical impossibility of the coffee cup sample belonging to anyone other than Alex Thorne. The evidence was complex, but the conclusion was simple and devastating. He was there. The motive, the prosecution argued, was not mentorship, but theft. They presented evidence showing that the core architecture of Titan Dynamics' most profitable AI division, launched 2 years after Maya's disappearance, was nearly identical to the Nexus algorithm described in Maya's own project files. Thorne, her trusted mentor, had not been helping her. He had been stealing from her. The patent dispute was not minor. It was Maya's first attempt to protect her intellectual property from the very man she thought was her ally. The prosecution's timeline was chilling. On the night of October 14, 2008, Maya had finally found irrefutable proof of Thorne's theft. She had confronted him. He had driven to her office for an unscheduled late-night meeting. The coffee cup proved his presence. They had argued not about her independence, but about his monumental betrayal. In a moment of rage, worried that his legacy would be exposed as a fraud, the celebrated genius had silenced the one person who could destroy him. He had killed her and disposed of her body, which, to this day, has never been found. The defense attorneys fought back, attempting to portray the evidence as a series of coincidences and the motive as pure speculation. They attacked the credibility of the science, calling it junk and theory. They painted Thorne as the victim of a witch hunt, a great man being torn down by envy, but they could not explain away the two fundamental facts, the dust and the DNA. The two microscopic pieces of evidence held together, forming an unbreakable chain that linked Alex Thorne to Maya Sharma's final moments. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice was firm. On the charge of first-degree murder, the verdict was guilty. A wave of sound washed over the courtroom, a collective gasp from the gallery, a sob from Anjali Sharma, a quiet, sharp exhale from Detective Rossi. Alex Thorne, the man who had built an empire, sat motionless, his face a mask of disbelief. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the aftermath, the Sharmas did not celebrate. There was no victory in this, only a devastating and final confirmation of their loss. Outside the courthouse, Rohan Sharma spoke to the waiting press, his voice heavy but clear. He said that this was not closure because closure was impossible. It was, however, accountability. It was justice for Maya. They could now hold a memorial not for a missing person, but for their daughter, and begin the process of mourning her, 17 years too late. The case of Maya Sharma leaves us with a chilling and vital lesson. It demonstrates that evil does not always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes it stands on a brightly lit stage, accepting awards and accolades. The same ambition that drives innovation and progress can, in a corrupted heart, curdle into a ruthless greed that values intellectual property over human life. Alex Thorne's story is a stark reminder that a brilliant mind and a moral compass are two very different things, and that the gleaming facade of success can hide the darkest of secrets. This case is also a profound testament to the power of persistence. It is a story of a family's unwavering love that refused to let their daughter's memory fade, and of an investigator's refusal to accept that a cold case meant a closed book. For 17 years, the truth lay dormant, encoded in a microscopic flake of metal and the faintest trace of DNA. It took the relentless advancement of science to read that code, proving that while justice can be delayed, and while memory can fade, the fundamental truths of what happened are often written into our physical world, waiting for the right tools to bring them to light. Maya Sharma's legacy is not only in the technology she pioneered, but in the powerful truth that no one is ever truly forgotten.